Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is now July 8th, 2025, and I want to talk about the situation, primarily the situation in Tibet. Now, the reason why this came up was because I recently had lunch with a couple of young guys who were ethnic Chinese. I met them through a mutual friend of mine, and this guy's from England, but whatever. And and so this one guy is from mainland China, and he's living here in Chiang Mai at least for some period of time. And his friend, who is Chinese, ethnic Chinese, I think he speaks some Chinese, but he's from the United States. So the topic of what's going on in China and the politics of China and especially in particular in terms of the issue of Tibet came up because there's a kind of a narrative in the West that Tibet is oppressed by the Chinese government, and in particular the Dalai Lama, who is a revered spiritual figure throughout the world, has been persecuted by the Chinese government, and it's all very unfair, and that's basically what we're told. So I guess about a year ago, I was attending a meditation class by this woman I think she's American, and but she's a nun, Buddhist nun, trained with the Dalai Lama for several years, and she's now a teacher, a very nice person. And she showed a video about with the Dalai Lama giving a talk, and the talk really shocked me because he told the story as it pretty much as it actually happened. So, although the West gives you the impression that Tibet was this idyllic place high in the mountains, the Himalayas, and it's the misty Himalayas and this sort of thing, and this idyllic society, in fact, the government in Tibet, even though it had been for centuries considered part of China, the Dalai Lama had to be approved by the Emperor of China. This is during the Chinese Empire. So Tibet has a centuries-long history of being part of China, but it's also had ran its own affairs internally, and it was basically run as a feudalistic theocracy. Maybe the top 5% of the population were wealthy merchants and nobles and people like that, and of course you had the whole monkhood, which made up a huge percentage of the population. But 95% of the population were serfs, and there were very draconian laws which said if you did something wrong, they'll cut off your hand, or if you did some other thing, they could gouge out your eyes. Oftentimes they would take young boys from families, and they'd go to the temple, and they'd be taken to the temple where they'd be treated essentially as sex objects. So, and this is all documented, but we're not told that in the West. We're just told about the evil Chinese. So what I did was I've posted a number of links where you can read about this stuff, and also there's some videos. So getting back to the actual story, in 1949, the Chinese Communist Revolution succeeded. They kicked out the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek. He was driven to the island of Taiwan, and he set up what he called the Republic of China. And the Republic of China was was on the UN Security Council. However, at a certain point, this is in 1949, and I guess by about 1970, 1971, somewhere in there, President Nixon realized that this was not workable. It was not practical, and so he basically said, okay, no, the actual government of China is located in Beijing. It's not located in Taiwan, and that government should be on the UN Security Council, not this what essentially a province of China. And Taiwan is not, in fact, a country. It is not part of the United Nations. International law recognizes it as part of China. Now, but you see, the situation with Tibet was such that in 1949, Tibet had been after the fall of the Chinese Empire in 1911. Tibet was kind of off by itself because the central government was very, very weak at that time. And finally, in 1949, with the victory of the Chinese communists, they went into Tibet and they met with the hierarchy and they said, look, Tibet is part of China. You know that as well as we do. The Dalai Lama was approved. Other high lamas in Tibet had to be approved by the Chinese empire, and so we want you to be, you're part of China. That doesn't mean that you can't have some self-government, but we don't want you to be involved in any kind of foreign policy. We don't want you to be taken over and used against us and as China. And in 1954, the Dalai Lama, who's a very young man, that time in his early 20s, was invited to Beijing by Mao Zedong, and he was, kind of scared to go there because he was afraid that they might imprison him or something like that. But when he got to Beijing, he said that, and this is all recorded, so in his own words, he said that Mao Zedong treated him like a son and treated him extremely well. And he said, look, Tibet used to be a strong country. You've had a very rough time. You're a very weak country, and we want to help you. And then, as you get stronger, then you can help us. And you've got a national flag. You can fly that flag. Just make sure that when you fly that flag, you also fly the Chinese national flag as well. So he was giving the Dalai Lama quite a lot of leeway. But the problem was, and as often happens, and I've talked about before, the CIA didn't want to have any part of this. So the CIA was training Tibetan guerrillas in Colorado, and I think in Nepal too. But anyway, training these guerrillas, stirring up trouble in Tibet, and so there was a rebellion that took place, and the Tibetan population had a choice to make. Should they support the Tibetan feudal theocracy, or should they support the Chinese government, or should they just sit it out? And apparently what happened was that they just didn't support the Tibetan feudal aristocracy, the theocracy, and the Chinese, without too much effort, was able to put down these guerrillas, and so Tibet was clearly in the control of China. But because the CIA had fomented this kind of internal, conflict within Tibet, they and especially the Dalai Lama's brother was basically being paid by them. When that whole rebellion fell apart, the Dalai Lama was taken out of Tibet and set up, his residence in India, and he was getting paid by the CIA for a number of years. So you can imagine that how the Chinese government felt, where they invite him to Beijing. They said, let's work together to build a country together. Essentially a contrived civil war breaks out. A contrived rebellion by the CIA comes in, and everybody knows if you're a Chinese, the CIA is not your friend, and that's why the Chinese government turned against the Dalai Lama to the extent that they consider him a complete traitor. If you can just imagine, people say, well, why didn't they? What's their problem? Let Tibet be Tibet. So there's parts of the United States that are not really happy with the federal government, like Texas or maybe the Lakota Sioux, in South Dakota. And if you can imagine the Chinese or the Russian arming guerrillas to fight the federal government and split big chunks of the United States off, the U.S., the government in Washington would not be real happy about that. And in fact, there's actually a kind of, there was, in the United States, there was a whole question of slavery and states' rights. A lot of it is the big issue in the Civil War ostensibly was states' rights. And states in the South said, we don't want the federal government telling us what to do. And if we want to employ slaves and treat them like shit, well, that's none of Washington's business. Well, we all know what happened with the Civil War. That Washington was not real pleased about that, and similarly, Tibet, Texas, what's the difference? The federal government, the central government says we're not going to allow our country to be split off, get split up. And the thing is, during the Civil War, actually, the British and the French were on the side of the Confederacy, on the side of the southern states, and this obviously did not make Abraham Lincoln real happy. But this is again a side note, the Russian emperor, the Russian Tsar, was sent a fleet to protect San Francisco and I think it was San Francisco and New York, and he said to the British and the French, don't you dare screw around with this war, because if you try to interfere directly in that war, you're going to be fighting the Russian Empire as well. So Russia was actually on the side of the United States of America during the Civil War. I'm kind of making an analogy between that, where Russia's the good guys in protecting the central government, whereas the CIA was the bad guys, trying to split off Tibet from China. So, as I say, what happened was the people in Tibet, had to make a choice. And they didn't have to. It's like they were there, and if they really wanted to support this theocracy that had oppressed them for centuries, they would have sided with the guerrillas and the rebels. But they didn't do that. So this is all discussed in a small book by a woman named Anna Louise Strong. She wrote, the book is called When the Serfs Rose Up, or Stood Up. And that she basically says this is what happened. The theocracy, which is extremely exploitative, said we're not going to support the theocracy anymore. And after the theocracy fell, there was land reform. People actually got, instead of being serfs on land, they were given their own land, and they got preferential treatment. There was a one child policy in China at that time, because they're concerned about the population, but Tibetans had a 3-child policy. So the Tibetans were actually given preferential treatment. But at the same time, they were saying, you guys who are practicing Tibetan Buddhism, we know that you're indoctrinating people in a way that is, we don't. It's promoting disloyalty to the central government, and we can't have that. And so China has been very, very sensitive about that, because they had a very, very bad experience with Christian missionaries coming into China and causing extremely serious problems, like basically a civil war in the 19th century, called the Taiping Rebellion, and somewhere between 20 million and 100 million Chinese died in that civil war. So that's why China is so sensitive to this outside interference, and it plays out in many, many levels. That's the reason why they have their own software, and they don't allow Facebook or Google into China, because they see those vehicles as a way to undermine the government of China, because they want to weaken the central government, and then split off parts of it, split off Tibet, split off Xinjiang, split off Taiwan, with the ultimate goal of bringing down the Chinese government and creating a recolonizing China, which is what had happened during during the 1800s. So, with the Opium Wars and many terrible things that the Western colonialists did. So that's the book by Anna Louise Strong. There's another excellent article by Michael Parente, who talked about all of these problems within the theocratic. He called it friendly feudalism, and he was being sardonic or ironic about the use of friendly, because it was hardly feudalism where you're treated as a serf or treated as a sex slave, is not friendly at all. So there's that article. There's a couple of other. There's the video where the Dalai Lama in his own words, he's speaking to a public audience, telling about he had a very good experience with Mao Zedong, and the CIA came in and they just messed it all up. That's the tragedy of the whole situation. The article by Michael Parente was spoken in some YouTube videos. I included 2 of those videos, so you can watch those. So that's what I want to bring up. I want to talk about this larger, what is going on in Ukraine, or the whole question about Taiwan, or the question about Tibet. And there's been color revolutions in the country of Georgia. They're in Armenia. They're trying to mess up Armenia. They're trying to create trouble in Azerbaijan. So this whole situation with Tibet is a case study in how the United States goes into a country and subverts it and tries to destroy it from the inside using its own people. So that's basically the long and short of it on my brief commentary here. And I hope you'll go through some of the materials. You can either read it or you can watch the videos, and then you'll be far better informed about what actually happened in Tibet. I want to just mention before I sign off, was that the Dalai Lama actually said at one point that he had great respect for Marxism. And he said at one point, I'm part Buddhist and part Marxist. And the reason why is because Marxism has this idea of social equality and fair distribution of wealth, whereas capitalism is all about private accumulation of wealth and exploitation. So, and of course, in communism, Marx had this idea. The normal situation of society is dictatorship of the oligarchs. That's what our actual condition is. I mean, let's not kid ourselves about what democracy is. The elections are bought here in the United States, and these kind of wealthy influences, they mess up elections all over the West. So when the Dalai Lama said, I'm part Marxist and I'm part Buddhist, it's because there's the idea of Marxism is a fair distribution of wealth, and the idea of communism is, and the idea of Buddhism is that you're we're all helping each other build up a society. It's the opposite of individualism. So again, the idea of Buddhism and the idea of communism are they put individualism in its proper perspective. Yes, we do have to take care of ourselves. We have our own situation. We want the best for ourselves and for our family. But if it's too extreme, the way it is in capitalism, and this extreme sense of individualism, that creates tremendous distortions within the society. And so the Dalai Lama recognized, after the fact, after all of this, this series of events that resulted in his getting kicked out of China and getting kicked out of, getting kicked out of China and being accused of being a traitor to China. Well, it's understandable because he was taking money from the enemy. I think in more recent years, he realized that he was being used, and he said at a certain point that he doesn't want to be involved in any kind of political activity. He wants to just work on spiritual practice and helping people that way. So I think he figured out, at a certain point what was happening, and this is a real cautionary tale. When people in these countries get into these internal conflicts, like Ukraine, these outsiders, the CIA or other NGOs, when they get involved in a country, they're not doing the country any favors. They're using dissent as a weapon to destroy the country, and they almost succeeded with Tibet, but they ultimately failed, and now Tibet is far more developed. Michael Prenti goes into the issue of the Chinese have not been angels either, and so he's very very even-handed about that. That's basically what I want to talk about, and please go through the materials so that you can understand this. Finally, if you would like to support my work, you can make a contribution through PayPal or through Buy Me a Coffee, or you can buy a subscription to my Substack, and or you can click on a couple of my store links and buy a T-shirt. I have little mottos like "Be kind" or "Question everything." Those sorts of things. So thank you again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.